Welcome to Professor's Corner. I'm joined with Melissa, and we're having a conversation about applied ethics and public policy. In this session, we're going to bring together some of the topics we've been talking about relevant to the role that a social political philosophy plays in the ethical dimensions of public policy. We're going to entitle it Toward a Social Conception of Christianity and Liberal Society.
So I feel that we've been talking a lot about this tension between having freedom but then also having some sort of objective morality.
Yeah.
And I guess I wanted to ask, can we talk more about how that fits together?
Well, you're right in that the whole idea here is that somehow if you have infallible knowledge, or if you have knowledge that you know to be true, that somehow there's no room for freedom or for opinion, or for people to come up with thoughts that are contrary to what the established view would be. So there's grown up to be a hostility towards objectivity and morals. So the question becomes, I think, is how do we get to a principled position of morality that preserves, or a principled position of liberalism that preserves an objectivity of a morality? Mm-hmm. I don't know if this will be helpful or not, but one way I think about it is our moral platitudes, like don't harm, they set up a constellation. And in the area where they don't overlap, that's really what liberty is. So our morality defines the parameters of our liberty. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So if you expand the moral principles around,
you have less freedom.
You constrain the freedom.
Right.
If you reduce that, you get more freedom. And I think that's kind of a little bit what's going on here. What you want to be able to do is have an objectivity to morality. And of course, as Christians, we have that in God. Mm-hmm. So it looks like if by way of review, it started out by liberty was a necessary condition for discovering the practical and theoretical truth about life.
Yes.
But that made liberty instrumental value.
Right.
That meant it could be rebutted and changed, and you could have interference, and it might get to the point where you really have liberty at all. Mm-hmm. Okay, depending on what the dynamics were on the ground, because this sort of the kind of approach didn't ground it in anything very sure.
Right.
And of course, the secular liberal is going to be very critical of any authority, whether on secular grounds or on religious grounds. They're going to see the religious person as being theocratic.
Right, and they're always going to push it to that extreme level, so you have to face that and defend yourself.
That's right.
That's not what you're trying to do.
What's interesting here, though, is that when the Bible talks about liberty, it always has it in the context of truth.
Right.
You always have truth and liberty together, so the truth will set you free.
Right.
And so objectivity, morals, and truth and liberty ought not to be juxtaposed. They ought to not be rivals.
Right.
So what we need to do is look at the possibilities. We know that utilitarianism provides a kind of a weak foundation.
Yes.
The pushback against utilitarianism, because remember that was an objective morality as well, the pushback was sort of, well, there are three types of arguments. One, that everybody has equal rights, and therefore their positions, their moral opinions are all equally plausible.
Right.
And we said to that, well, you may have an equal right to express your view, but not all views are plausible.
Yes.
And we'd have to get into debate.
There is a hierarchy in some level, but that depends on your moral scheme.
It is.
How you determine that.
And we'll work that as we go through the class.
Right.
Another argument that we pointed out is that, and so that was against objectivity. Another one against objectivity is that moral objectivity supports intolerance.
Yes.
And that's what we're talking about right now. If you have the truth and you know it to be true, does that mean that there's no freedom left?
Right.
I think of Plato in the Republic, where his philosopher kings intervened on certain knowledge, and there wasn't room for the rest of society, to be free in their opinions. So it's the same kind of thing that the skeptic fears, the skeptical liberal fears about objectivists and morals in Christians.
Right.
Then there's the third related argument that goes to the exclusivity of claims, and it wants to say basically that objectivity in morals makes certain views more exclusive than others, and they don't like that. It's
that kind of connects to that whole hierarchy idea. You don't want anything to be above, and you definitely don't want to say that one thing is always right.
That's right.
Okay.
So the Romantic, what you really get at is the pushback here is coming from Romanicism, and it's basically saying, I'm the creator of my own values.
Right.
Right.
Well, are there any other approaches to sort of putting these two things together beyond the utilitarian?
There are, and I actually think in the end, and I'm just rehearsing now some ideas that Basil Mitchell had, but I think in the end the Christian view is going to get us there. If we were to think about this, and the students will be reading about this in the course ahead, one would be based on Emmanuel. If utilitarianism doesn't work,
right.
We've already excluded it.
Right.
And even though it's objective, then what do we have left? Well, Immanuel Kant, is a philosopher in the late 18th, early 19th century, and he had a view that we should never treat people as means, but only as ends.
Right.
That is, to treat them with intrinsic value.
Right.
Now, as it happens, Kant was borrowing from the Christian tradition on the human individual as having intrinsic value because of their relationship to God. Mm-hmm. But he tried to strip it away from the theological or theoretical framework and try to preserve that pristine notion without the metaphysical scheme. And so that would be one approach to do it. And it's attractive to a lot of Christians. And it usually gets defended on the basis of conscience.
It definitely feels more attractive to me than utilitarianism.
Yeah.
It's closer.
Yeah.
It's still not going to work fully because it's not bringing in ideas about God and his thought.
Well, Kant was trying to preclude all that. But he was trying to get liberty established on an intrinsic basis.
Right.
But what happens in this model, Melissa, is that a free choice is good simply because it was freely chosen. It's not because the content of the choice is a good content.
I see.
So, and so you still have a problem with what do we do about bad actors out there who act wrongly and know they act wrongly?
Right.
Okay. What if we knew that to be the case? Is there any way that we could constrain that liberty? Now, as it happens in liberal society, we're probably going to answer that question by saying, no, people can act wrongly even though we know they're acting wrongly. But we still can make moral judgments about that action. Where it's different with contemporary multiculturalism, you cannot make moral judgments about a wrong act. Mm-hmm. Hence, we have to create safe places.
Right.
To make a judgment, a moral judgment outside of, where the law is not involved, but we still make moral judgments.
Right.
That's considered a microaggression.
Okay.
And so the multicultural is saying there can be no morality.
Right.
So if that makes sense, that's what we're trying to get to, is we're saying, okay, we're not going to enforce when somebody acts wrongly and know they act wrongly. We're going to have other criteria by which we bring the law in. But that doesn't mean we still can't make moral judgments.
Right.
Right? And the multicultural saying, oh, you can't make those because there are many truths and no truth. So that's a microaggression. If you're going to judge me, even in the private realm where the law is not involved, you're aggressing against me as an individual.
So let me see if I'm understanding this. Romanticism needs some objectivity to it. We looked at the utilitarian approach, and it's just too calculated. It doesn't work, especially for a Christian, right? If you're, so now then we try to move into sort of the Kantian notion, which I guess is deontology.
Yeah.
Okay, and we're still seeing that's not going to fully work for us because even though it's better, it's still secular. And
it makes no content. The idea is that what makes an act good is that it was freely chosen and not what the act itself, the content of the act.
So we still are kind of stuck with the same issue, which is we've still got this idea of freedom. We need some constraint on it. We need some objective truth to it. Is Christianity going to help us out?
If morality is grounded in God, and remember back to the constellation where there's an opening is liberty. If it's grounded in God, then you have an objective basis, and if that objective morality says treat the individual as is intrinsically valuable because they have an eternal destiny with God Himself, you're going to not be making interventions in that person's life. And so consequently, that's the idea of kind of, I don't know, we would want to call it Christian liberalism, but Christianity in relationship to liberalism, because what it gives to liberal is the unique and supreme value of the individual.
Yeah.
But it's based not upon man's creation of values. It's based upon that relationship with God, who has redeemed us because we are of value to Him, value higher than any other place in creation, including animals, including trees, including the environment, etc. Not that we can abuse any of those, but we've been created for a special purpose, a special end.
Right.
And when you recognize that, you recognize that we are given with that a liberty that only God will judge.
Right.
So what we try to do is, yes, we will acknowledge that people have, in effect, a right to be wrong.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that we still can't make moral judgments about that wrong act.
Right.
And it's only the seculars who's now saying, oh, we don't want anybody to make any judgments at all, so we have to create safe spaces.
As a Christian, I think what I'm hearing too is that the scope of the objective morality is bigger than what maybe the new liberalism suggests. It's going to go beyond truth-telling and not harming and all these things. It's going to step into some areas that might be a bit more uncomfortable for the average person, such as your sexuality or your decisions about how you spend your money, or your decisions about, things that are hard. But because as a Christian you have a broader umbrella, knowing Christ and God's ideas in those areas, it's going to constrain your liberty, but it's also because of your relationship with Christ, you feel open to constraining that liberty. You're sort of Well,
and but that's true, and as you can imagine, as you think about this constellation, that it's a richer notion. But secular people think about the same issues of sex. They think about the same issues of wealth.
But they may not put them into they may not have anything really that goes in the small circle on those, except not to harm or not to lie or something like that.
That's right. And so that's where we want to, we'll spend more time. To summarize, we can come up with, in a way, sort of three varieties of liberalism.
Okay.
On the one hand, we can have a liberalism that is skeptical of religious and metaphysical claims.
Yes.
But it still attaches a supreme value to human life for the discovery of truth and attainment of human flourishing.
Is that Kant?
Actually, that's going to be our utilitarian.
Oh, that's utilitarian. Okay.
And so the liberty is sort of a condition for, and then we have where liberalism is skeptical of religious and metaphysical and moral claims. This sounds a little bit like the Romantic, except for this minimal condition. And this is this liberal, this multicultural or new liberalism that we're calling it. And it places supreme value upon human life and the diversity upon personal ideals, which are created and sustained but by subjective preferences and not possessing any morality. So that gets us this sort of relativism that we encounter, that we call relativism, and we encounter it sometimes that way, sometimes we encountered it at that minimal realm, and then it's all of a sudden it's an absolutism, we get confused, we need to confront the whole scheme. And then there's a view of liberalism that bases itself on the conviction about the nature and destiny of human beings, and where fundamental human need is that the individual has a free choice in life, freedom to choose life, and that this conception is understood in an explicit metaphysical sort of framework or theological framework that gives this meaning.
And it's going to be that third camp where I'm thinking at this moment that as a Christian I might fit most comfortably.
Yes.
The others might have elements that I'll be able to connect to. But the third one is probably going to be closest to home for me.
Right, and to some, it looks like in all three of these, of course, because it's liberalism, this will be no surprise, that they all are trying to figure out a way of how to honor and protect the high value, supreme value placed upon the human individual. And it began, of course, with Christianity, protecting it within a Christian framework. They stripped it away. We ran into problems with utilitarianism. We tried to adjust for it with the Kantian sort of in intellectual history to adjust for it with Kantianism. That didn't work because you had no way of judging content.
Mm-hmm.
Without judging content, this constellation can constrict
Right.
As well, and so we end up back with trying to defend the Christian notion on objective grounds. But we recognize the sanctity of the individual.
Individual. Great. I
Good.
look forward to learning more.
Thanks.